So very excited to have everybody in. And just in the interest of time, I'd like to get kicked off as soon as possible. So let me just check my list here. We will follow the schedule that is on the program. And again, let me post a link to that in the chat so people can follow along if they would like to. I will be monitoring the chat as well for the questions. I will not interrupt the speakers. So for the speakers, you'll have a 7-minute time frame to present. I'm trying to figure out the best way to let you know where we are in that time. I think what I'm going to do is in the chat, I'm going to send you a private message that will give you a countdown of like 2 minutes, 1 minute, and then when I cut it, again, I will have to step in and stop you if you go over the 7 minutes, just because we do have so many presentations to get through in a short period of time. So I do recommend you have like a timer that you're watching as you're presenting. Does anyone have any questions before we get started? All right. So the first presentation on our list here is The Quarterback and the Situation by Isaac Spear. Let me see if he's here now. I'm looking for you so I can catch you. Isaac, are you here? Does not look like it. We will have to come back to him. All right. So our next presentation I have on my list is Mayfield, and I could go through the entirety of the algorithm, the acronym Machine Learning Algorithm for Yearly Forecasting Indicators and Estimation of Long-Run Player Development by Alex Williams, Ben Clark, Seth Brugler at The Ohio State University. So I am actually making the three of you co-host, and if you guys want to share your screen, you are welcome to do so. And then, are you all going to be presenting, or will it just be one of you?
It'll be two of us.
Okay. You may go ahead and share the screen, and you can start when you're ready. Alex, are you guys ready?
Yeah, give me a minute to pull this up. Okay, is that displaying?
All right, we got it. Everybody should be able to see now. If you could, if people in the chat, or not the chat, if you click on participants, can you click on the yes button if you can see? Click on participant. Yep. All right, good. We are good to go. So I'm going to start your clock now. Go ahead.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending this presentation. As Dr. Draper said, our project is Mayfield Machine Learning Algorithm for Yearly Forecasting Indicators and Estimation of Long-Run Player Development. We're trying to predict the career long-term performance of players in the National Football League. I'm Alexander Williams. Seth, are you here?
Yep, I'm Seth Brugler.
All right.
So for a little background of our project, we're looking at accurate forecasting of on-field performance in professionals, or like looking at it, on-field performances in a professional sports is a major component of player evaluation by fans, coaches, and sports executives. Current NFL player statistics prediction models are often limited to only a few positions. They're irreproducible or inaccurate. Kubiak by Football Outsiders is a top proprietary model, and it actually performed worse than a naive model during preliminary tests. Other sports leagues, such as the Major League Baseball and NBA, have advanced player statistics forecasting models, which are developed more and more accurate than their NFL counterparts, although their data and algorithms are not publicly available, and their capabilities are not well understood as well, as work in this area is not subjected to rigorous academic peer review. K-nearest neighbor algorithms have been successfully applied for predictive models in other fields, including credit scoring and diagnosing heart disease. So you see it has a wide range of fields. And so we propose and implement a novel KNN regression model for prediction of yearly NFL player statistics, as well as several supporting metrics. Our data sources that we use are Pro Football Reference for the NFL data and Sports Reference for our college data. Our data includes on-field statistics, such as passing yards, tackles, so on, biographical data, height, years of NFL experience, their 40-yard dash time, etc., and team-related information such as the current head coach, consecutive years with the same team and the same coordinator, weighted average at AV of team offensive line, and we do that for every player, position, team, and season in the data. The training set we use is from 1970 through 2017, which is 76,000, over 76,000 player seasons. The cross-validation set we use is from 2018 to 2019, which is 1,600 player seasons, and both are across 105 different variables. It's the largest data set ever publicly tested for NFL player performance forecasting. And we adapt Szymborski's major league equivalencies for use in the NFL and college. We calculate stadium, year, and league factors and translate all data to 2019 NFL baseline levels to strip out variance, then normalize and segment the data into overlapping Y-year segments of each player's career.
All right, so once we've segmented out the player's career, we have these little snippets of data from each different part of the player's career. And what we do, since there's a lot of those different segments, we run a hashing procedure that basically speeds up the computational time. So instead of basically searching for nearest neighbors among every single player ever, we use this hashing algorithm called locality sensitive hashing, which narrows down our search set for our nearest neighbor algorithm. Then given our reduced search set from our locality sensitive hashing algorithm, we compute similarity scores between each of the players in that reduced search set. Similarity scores have a history and a track record. Bill James proposed similarity scores originally in, I think, the 1985 baseball abstract, and we implement a more formal method of that, where we compute weighted Euclidean distance among each of those 105 variable categories. And then we take a radial basis function kernel of that, which gives us a nice 0 to 1 similarity score, where 1 is an exactly identical player and where 0 would be an infinitely dissimilar player. Then, given those similarity scores, we compute linear regression of the player who we're trying to forecast future statistics based on the players that they are most similar to. So we take the K most similar players, where K is some parameter that we specify, and we use that set of the K most similar players to conduct a regression of those of that player's future statistics based on their close comparables. Then there's a lot of tuning parameters and weighting parameters that we use in this algorithm. And so we use a CMAES, which is Covariance Matrix Adaptation Evolution Strategy solver, to optimize each of these parameters. So the way we do that is that we calculate the root mean squared error, which is the standard measure of prediction error used in just about all sorts of forecasting. And we used our CMAES solver to optimize our weighting and tuning parameters to make Mayfield the most accurate possible. And then once we've trained the model and it's learned all of the optimal parameters, we forecast forward all of the final predictions of each player and each segment specifically in the data set going forward. So for instance, if we're talking about a segment of Tom Brady from 2004 to 2006, we forecast forward his 2007, 8, 9, so on performance, and compare that to exactly what happened in the real world. And based on that, we make our final selections of some of those parameters that we were talking about.
So when we take a look at the results, we see that Mayfield offers considerable improvement over existing prediction models, such as the aforementioned Kubiak. The RMSEs for quarterbacks were approximately 6% lower on average. As you can take a look at our chart on the right, we can see an example of that. Mayfield also compares favorably to other more specialized forecasting models, despite being a general algorithm rather than tailored to a few specific positions, such as fantasy relevant positions.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, even though our presentation slides don't have it, the results for non-quarterbacks are very similar as well.
For conclusions, the results demonstrate the validity of KNN algorithms' ability to generate forecasts of sports statistics while doing so.
All right,
both.
guys, I'm going to have to cut you off here, but
Okay.
no, you can keep this slide up while we open up to questions.
Cool.
Thank you very much. Really do appreciate it. Good, very interesting stuff. So let me go and open it up to questions. Does anyone, if you want to hit the participants button, and we can raise hands. So I'll point it out to where we're going. So let's start with Jacob.
Yes, hi, good morning.
Good morning.
Just out of curiosity, I know your comparison was the Kubiak model from Football Outsiders. I'm pretty familiar with them. Did you attempt to reach out to anybody else to try and compare to their model? Like I know Pro Football Focus has a war model that they stomp their feet about pretty regularly. Or anybody else? Thank you.
Yeah, so I'm not exactly familiar with the Pro Football Focus model. You said that was a war prediction?
Yeah, it's a wins above replacement model. It's very similar to what both the Kubiak and baseball's war model.
Yeah, so the statistics we're trying to predict here are all of the normal sort of standard box score statistics for all of the different positions, you know, things like passing yards, touchdowns, field goals made, you know, interceptions, that sort of thing. So WAR is not one of the variables in our specific data set that we use. The closest sort of approximation to that would be approximate value, which is Pro Football References sort of signature WAR-like metric. So while we're not particularly familiar with the Pro Football Focus model, but at least as far as other player statistics forecasting models, we have searched pretty broadly for things like us that are predicting, you know, most of the standard box score models. And surprisingly, they're really it's really an underdeveloped field. There's very limited types of these models, both in academic literature or sort of in the pro sports sphere on the internet.
Let me go and move over to Meredith.
Hi, yeah. I was curious if in your initial stages you had done any dimension reduction, because I know you had mentioned there were about 100 variables you were working with. Was that a consideration, or was that just not something that you had thought about going into things?
Yeah, so the locality sensitive hashing, while it's not direct dimensionality reduction, so it's not something like principal components analysis or anything like that. What it does effectively serve as a sort of quasi-dimensional reduction model, because it's serving the same focus of speeding up our run times and decreasing the amount of comparison. Basically the computational cost of calculating those distances is the sort of key computational point of interest here. And so dimensionality reduction, if we'd gone that route, that would be one way to speed things up, so that calculating our distances, we'd be doing it across a much lower dimensional set. Whereas here we chose locality sensitive hashing instead, because we felt that it preserved the fidelity of the sort of original set of variables better, while still providing a decrease in runtime that we wanted from something like principal components analysis. So basically, you can either reduce the number of dimensions you compare across, or you reduce the size of the sample you compare across. If you want to reduce the computational cost of calculating all of the distances when you're performing a nearest neighbor search. And so we decided that locality sensitive hashing was way we were going to do that.
Real quick, Nick, you can ask your question, then we're going to move on to the next presentation.
All right. Hey guys, nice presentation. This seems to have a pretty strong application to Dynasty Fantasy Football, and I was just wondering if there are any specific players that came out of this model better than you would have expected, or better than, models you compared them to.
We haven't looked, if you're talking about going forward in the future, we haven't really looked at individual player forecasts very much. Most of the sort of output data we deal with is mostly in the aggregate. One thing that we have found that Mayfield sort of likes is very stable year-to-year performance in terms of forecasting like optimal outcomes in the future. It's a model that it's an interpolation based model. It's looking at things in the past and sort of taking the average of it. So it's going to predict a lot of regression to the mean, sort of regardless of where you're coming from, and that's just a feature of the model. So it is going to be a little more conservative for those sort of forecasts.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I was thinking about bad puns. It's a very progressive model for your Mayfield. So, all right. Well, thank you guys very much. I'm gonna move back. Actually, we have Isaac here joining us now. So I am going to turn it over to Isaac Spear from the University of Pennsylvania on the quarterback in the situation. So Isaac, you are free to share your screen and good to go.
Great, thanks a lot. All right. Can everybody see that and hear me okay?
All good. And I will, since I know we had this issue of the switching of the room, so that's on us. I will give you a 2-minute and a 1-minute in the chat.
All right, sounds good. Thanks.
When you're ready.
All right. Well, hey everybody, how's it going? Excited to be here. My name is Isaac. I'm a senior at the University of Pennsylvania studying psychology. My presentation titled "The Quarterback in the Situation." It's a very shortened version of this long title for my paper from last year, which was part of an undergraduate research project advised by Professor Angela Duckworth in the psychology department, and Danny Southwick, who's one of her PhD students. He's also a former Arena League quarterback. So first of all, just the motivation behind this research. So first of all, we wanted to take this social psychology concept called the fundamental attribution error and kind of study it in the real world, because all the studies up to this point have been in the lab. And then from the football perspective, it's how can we use these insights from social psychology to help us improve quarterback evaluation in the NFL. First of all, what's the fundamental attribution error? It's a very long-winded concept, right? I'm just gonna shorten it to FAE. So basically, when we observe other people's behavior, we tend to overestimate how influential individual characteristics are, something about that person, and we tend to underestimate the role of situational influences or environmental factors. And this is because people's behavior is more observable or more easy to understand than the context around it, than the situation and the outside factors affecting that behavior. So in football and with quarterbacks, the behavior that we're concerned with is success or performance. So with a guy like Tom Brady, is his performance, is his success more a factor of his individual ability as a quarterback, or is it more a result of his coaching or his receivers or his offensive line? So this is the question that we're looking to probe with this research. So in the current investigation, we had to break it up into 2 studies because FAE has 2 parts. So first, you have to see whether people will weight certain factors as being more influential on performance or on success than others. And then you have to establish the error and say, okay, you're evaluating or you're weighting the individual factors incorrectly. So in the first study, we surveyed people via Amazon Mechanical Turk, which is an online survey platform. And we basically first just asked them to nominate a list of factors that they believe have a strong influence on quarterback success in the NFL. And we operationalized that with passer rating. So these are just some of the ones they nominated. You can see something like accuracy was heavily nominated. That's an individual factor. Something like a good offensive line is a situational factor. So we use these factors to create a balanced menu of individual and situational factors. You see the individual in red and the situational in blue. And then we had participants rate these factors, each one, on how influential they are on passer rating, again, representing success. and then indicate whether they believed each factor to be more individual or more situational. And then finally, we just ask them straight up, do you think individual ability or situational influences are more influential on quarterback success? And this graph here shows that they kind of just knew what we were getting at. They indicated, the individual factors to be individual and the situational ones to be situational. And then in the aggregate, they believed individual factors to be more influential on passer rating than the situational factors. And then once again, when we asked them straight up, they also weighted the individual factors. So here we have the first part of FAE. We have the weighting of the individual factors over the situational factors. So now in study 2, what we have to do is predict quarterback success and show that situational factors are indeed more predictive of success. We use passer rating as our dependent variable once again. So we had 2 models. In our individual model, we used college performance data and NFL combine statistics. So this was 27 different predictor variables, but we used the model selection to whittle that down to the best model. It was like a 2-variable model, I believe. And then for the situational model, we use drop percentage and pressure percentage. Now, the situational model is the difficult piece because you have to kind of separate the quarterback from his teammates, and you have to evaluate his teammates or his coaches outside, completely independent of the quarterback's performance. So drop percentage, obviously, percentage of passes, on-target passes that a receiver drops, and then pressure percentage is the percentage of passing dropbacks in which quarterback's pressured. So that's like offensive line play, defensive line play. And now the quarterback can have a say in the pressure percentage, right, based on how long they hold onto the ball. But with this variable, we controlled for time to throw. So we kind of eliminated that influence. And then what do we find? We found that situational factors explain 90% of the variance in NFL passer rating for a quarterback's first 4 years. So we're using 4 years of college to predict 4 years of pro, whereas the individual factors only predicted 7%. So together, these findings kind of show evidence for FAE. Now, this study was kind of limited in its scope, I would say. So this what's next slide is pretty important. So first of all, we want to survey NFL scouts, coaches, other just expert talent evaluators to see if they commit FAE. We also want to include more situational statistics, so more quantifiable aspects of influences that are outside of the quarterback's control. So yards after the catch, receiver performance, defensive quality, both of the defense that a quarterback's facing and a defense and the quarterback's own defense. And then we also want to examine more dependent variables. Obviously, passer rating has its issues. It doesn't account for rushing, sacks, all that stuff. But we believe, the same results will be replicated with something like average net yards over attempt or EPA. So that's it. I'm excited to take your questions. Here, you can contact me here if you have any further feedback, but I'll stop my share. Actually, no, I'll just take questions, I guess, without stopping the share.
All right, thank you very much, Isaac. Very interesting. Let me go and open up to questions. If you want to raise hands, I will direct the questions to Isaac. I have one to start. Who was surveyed?
Yeah, so we surveyed we recruited participants via this platform, Amazon Mechanical Turk, which, we could just have gotten anybody, but we filtered them via this like little football quiz. It literally just asked questions like, who's the head coach of the Patriots? Which quarterbacks won the most Super Bowls of all time, just so that we had people that at least had some knowledge of football.
Finn said a couple times that sacks are a quarterback stat, and you said you controlled for time to throw, which I think that definitely helps. But do you think that there's anything to do with a quarterback that maybe is not as mobile to lower the time to throw based on their ability rather than their offensive line's ability?
Yeah, so we definitely thought about that, and we thought controlling for time to throw was sufficient to kind of separate the QB. Pressure percentage ended up not being a very strong predictor in the model anyway. It was mostly drop percentage carrying it. But yeah, it was definitely a consideration. We looked at whether basically this test that we do to see if these statistics are kind of on the quarterback or on his teammates is whether they translate from team to team if a quarterback switches teams. So it's been shown in the past that sacks, travel with the QB, whereas drop percentage does not, and pressure percentage does not when you control for time to throw.
Very cool. Do I have any other questions? All right. Well, thank you very much, Isaac.
No, thank you.
We'll move over to Hunter Green. I should have mentioned that Isaac is from the University of Pennsylvania. So great to have a nice mix. I believe we have people from 10 different universities that are joining us. So I'm very excited for that. Thank you, Isaac. Let's move over to Hunter Green, also from the Ohio State University. Hunter, you should have permissions if you want to go ahead and share your screen.
Okay. Okay.
Then on deck, I have Patrick Smith, but I believe Patrick submitted a video, so we'll watch a video for him.
Can everyone see that okay?
Not at this time, no.
Okay. Oh, share.
There we go.
There it is. Okay.
All righty. Whenever you're ready.
Okay. So today, my name is Hunter Green, and I'll be presenting on the value of an interception in the NFL. I'm using data from this year's Big Data Bowl competition, which is 2018 play-by-play data. So first, let's take a look at this interception.
Pressure on Stafford, who goes deep.
Okay, let's break this down. So there's a deep throw, 4th and 15. And if you're the Bears, you now have the ball on the 1 yard line with 99 yards to go to score. Let's compare that to this play. Okay.
Pass is intercepted by Bobby Wagner.
As you can see, he stripped the other team of what was most likely going to be a score because of their situation, brought it all the way to the house for a score of his own. Great play. So now you are a rookie corner. Your goal is to win Defensive Rookie of the Year and help lead your team to a Super Bowl victory. To do so, you want to make your interceptions as valuable as possible by maximizing EPA, expected points added, for your team. So how are you going to do this? Well, first let's look at what makes an interception valuable. In the green, you can see what makes an interception valuable. Things that jump off the page are return yards and touchdowns. And then in the red, you'll see stuff that doesn't correlate well with defensive teams' EPA. So on later downs, there's not as good of a correlation with a high EPA. So let's break this down. Okay, so you are a corner. You're wondering what can you do to make your interceptions more valuable. First thing you look at, quarter. Does it matter what quarter you get your interception in? No, not really. As you can see, pretty much every quarter has similar average EPA. And so what quarter you get your interception in doesn't really matter. Okay, you keep rocking and rolling. You're getting your interceptions. You're doing great, but you want to add more valuable. What do you look at next? Okay, you look at down. So first and second down, you can see there is more value in getting an interception than there is on 3rd and 4th down, especially 4th down. And this makes sense because on 4th down, the other team's drive was most likely going to end anyway, just because it was 4th down. So you taking the ball away doesn't really change things that much. It's almost like a glorified punt return. Whereas 1st and 2nd down, their drive still has lots of hope, and you're taking that hope right out of their hands and into yours. Okay, what about yards to go? Well, as you can see, this is kind of all over the place, but we want to focus in on about 1 yard to go to 12 yards to go, because anything after that, there's not that much data that has an interception on those different yards to go markers. Okay, well, when looking at that 1 to 12 range, you can see it kind of trends down as the less yards to go, the more valuable the interception is. This makes sense because a 2nd and 2 drive is still very much alive, where compared to a 2nd and 12 drive, where there's less likely chance that drive continues. So you're better off at you'll get more value when you intercept a 2nd and 2 interception, just because you're taking more away from the other team. Okay, you've maximized value based off down and distance. Way to go, but you want to add more. What do you look at next? Return yards. As you can see, return yards has a huge correlation with the EPA. So the farther you're going to return the ball, the more value it's going to add for your team. Okay, you've become a master at returning the ball, and rumor has it the offense even wants to get you involved. You're that good at the ball in your hands. But you want to add more value. What do you do next? Score. As you can see, scoring makes a huge difference in EPA. If you score a touchdown, you get almost 8 expected points added, as compared to if you don't score, you get only about 4 expected points added. This makes sense but it could seem weird that a touchdown is worth more than just the 6 or 7 points you'd expect from a touchdown, whether or not you include the PAT. And the reason for this is because not only are you scoring and getting those points for your own team, but you also took the ball away from the other team, which is going to stop them from scoring on their drive. Okay, now you're a master at bringing it to the house, scoring left and right. Next goal, Defensive Rookie of the Year. Okay, let's take a look at this. So in the red, you see just regular interception count, which is provided by many box scores. That's great and all, but what's more valuable is the total EPA from interceptions, and that you see in blue. So you want to be as far left on this chart as you can, and those guys are getting almost 30 expected points added from the interceptions. So that's almost on a 16-game basis. That's almost 2 points per game, just based off their interceptions alone. There you go. You did it. You won Defensive Rookie of the Year. Congratulations. Now let's see how your impact helped your team. So because of your contribution, you're now in the top right-hand corner of this chart. As you can see, this chart has average expected points off interceptions per game running horizontally and wins vertically. So in 2018, the Bears were getting over 7 expected points added just off the interceptions alone, and that led to a very high win total, and you helped do the same for your team. And now you are Super Bowl bound. Congratulations. Okay, Super Bowl, here you are, big play. If you need a stop, if you don't get a stop, you lose. It all comes down to this. And boom, there you go. You did it. The most valuable interception of all. You helped clinch the game for your team, and you are now Super Bowl champions. Congratulations. Now, do I have any post-game interview questions? Also, I'm always looking to get connections, so if you're interested, there's my link to my LinkedIn page, and thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Hunter. I'll open it up to questions here. I will start with Jacob.
Hey, good morning again. Great job, Hunter. My question is when you're looking at interceptions, were you able to, or possibly in the future, take into account like the difference between what I guess you would call a real interception versus luck, as in if a quarterback makes the right decision, makes the right pass, and is an accurate pass, but the receiver just pups the ball up and it just basically gets the defensive player who had no effect on the play ends up with an interception, versus a quarterback actually making a bad pass, throwing it right to the defender's hands and making an interception. Like, were you able to account for that in your research, or is that something you might be able to look to in the future?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I did not really factor that in because I looked mostly at like the defensive side of the ball. So that would be something interesting in looking at. With the data I used, I didn't really, that wasn't really my goal. And so I'd love to add that in the future, but that wasn't something I really looked at, no.
Do we have any other questions? So in your data set, this is just the 2018 season. Is that correct?
Yeah, it was the so this year's Data Bowl competition had play-by-play data from the 2018 season. So that's what I used. So
how many interceptions were in the data set?
There was I want to say over like 240. So pretty significant amount.
Yeah, the tough thing is to control for interceptions happen somewhat randomly. So that's one of those things that the situation means a lot to where you're at. I think you had one person that had a return yards of over 100, but I'm guessing that's an official 100-yard return. But I'm guessing if Big Data Bowl, you probably were able to tell where they caught it in the end zone to where they returned it. So
yeah, that was most likely the play I showed, which is the Bobby
right.
Wagner interception. That was the most valuable interception of all of these, and it had almost 12 expected points added just off that play. Whereas like that first play I showed, that actually had negative expected points added. So
the fourth down interceptions where you yell at the defense for that. So
right, yeah.
All right. Anything else? All right. Thank you, Hunter. Now, we're going to do something a little bit different here because our next two presentations are video presentations. And I think the best way to do this is I'm going to share my screen. And we will go from there. I'll figure out how to get this full screen, but I am going to show it, and I also do want to open it up to questions at the end. As I said, even though we won't have an answer, we can at least discuss it. And if there's any, the presenter will be able to watch the video if they have any, if they want to get some feedback on their research. Just so I double check, Patrick Smith, are you here? All right, so I'm going to share my screen, make sure I get this optimized. Can everyone see okay? Hunter, you're the only one I can see. Can you nod if you can see it, see the video?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, I see.
And then I'm going to start playing. If there's an issue, if there's an error, if something goes wrong, give me some kind of a wave or let me know. All right, so we have The Impact of Temperature on the NFL by Patrick Smith, also of The Ohio State University.
My name is Patrick Smith. I'm a junior at Ohio State. My presentation is The Impact of Temperature on the NFL. Analyze teams. My
Is
name
anyone getting
Patrick
any
Smith.
audio?
I'm a junior at Ohio State. Weather and temperature are often brought up. So I wanted to look at whether teams from quote unquote cold areas are better in cold games than teams from warm areas are. So to do this, I analyzed the
Oh, you guys
impact
are
that
getting audio?
temperature
Okay,
had on-
I apologize.
My name is
I am
Patrick
not.
Smith. I'm a
So
junior
I'm
at
going to
Ohio
go
State.
ahead and
My
start it over, and
presentation
I'll
is
let
the
you guys
impact of
enjoy.
temperature on the NFL. So when discussing home field advantage, weather and temperature are often brought up. So I wanted to look at whether teams from quote unquote cold areas are better in cold games than teams from warm areas are. So to do this, I analyzed the impact that temperature had on expected points added, or EPA, over the last decade. And to do this, I divided teams into cold weather teams and warm weather teams, depending on what city they were from. So cold weather teams are teams that are from a city with an average temperature from September through December of less than 50 degrees. And this 50-degree threshold is somewhat arbitrary, but many of the preconceived cold teams fell below this threshold, so I felt it was fitting. I also divided games into cold and warm games based on game temperature. I originally used 32 degrees Fahrenheit as a threshold for cold games, but there were many teams that didn't play in a lot of games below this threshold, so I bumped it up to 40 degrees to try to get a more complete analysis. So I used data from the NFL FastStar package in R, and this package contains play-by-play data dating back to the 1999 season, but I was only focused on this past decade. It contains hundreds of variables for each play, but I was only interested in a select few. With this data, I excluded any play that wasn't a run or a pass play, and any game that was played in a dome because I was only concerned with games that were affected by outdoor temperatures. I also used data from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and this data contained monthly averages for many US cities, and then I used this to calculate this averages for each city temperature during the NFL season. So here's some summary statistics. As you can see, average game temperature was around 60 degrees Fahrenheit. And EPA per play was close to 0. And then for the NFL city temperatures, the minimum value of 40.6 corresponds to Green Bay, and the max of 77.1 corresponds to Miami. And then here's some more summary statistics, except this time divided by game type, so cold games on top, warm games on the bottom. Interestingly, EPA is slightly higher for cold games, so I think that's something to note. And then here's some more summary statistics, this time for cold teams versus warm teams. And again, EPA is higher for cold teams regardless of game temperature. So I ran a regression for EPA per play using the equation shown. And I included wind as a control variable. And then cold game is just a dummy variable for games below 40 degrees Fahrenheit. So 1 if it's below, and then 0 if it's above. And then cold team is a dummy variable for teams from a city with an average temperature below 50 degrees Fahrenheit during the NFL season. And then so just a general interpretation, all else equal, beta 1 represents the change in EPA per play for a 1 degree Fahrenheit change in game temperature. So here's the regression results. As you can see, temperature is very close to 0, and because of its high p-value is not significant. So therefore, it has very little to no effect on EPA per play. And then looking at the estimate for cold teams, EPA per play is higher for cold teams than warm teams, holding all else equal due to its low p-value. Here's a graph for EPA per play versus temperature for NFL games. The regression line was fit, and as you can see, there is not really much of a difference in EPA per play for different temperatures. So I also use jitter temperatures, which is just adding small values to each temperature to make the graph more visually pleasing. Since the regression results were a little underwhelming, I was interested in seeing if certain teams had higher EPA per plays in cold games. So I performed a z-test on the difference of EPA per play in cold games and the EPA per play in warm games for each team. So here's the two-sample z-test for the difference in EPA per play between cold games and warm games for each NFL team. So the red bars represent a warm city or warm team, and the blue bars represent a cold team or cold city. So only 3 teams were significantly better or worse in cold temperatures. These include Philadelphia, which was significantly worse, and then New Orleans and Arizona, which were significantly better. And this is interesting because Arizona and New Orleans both play in domes and are warm teams, but also Arizona and New Orleans only ran 193 and 464 plays respectively, which is less than most teams. So this might have something to do with why they had such a large Z statistic. So lastly, I ran another 2-sample z-test to see whether the EPA per play for cold teams was actually different than the EPA per play for warm teams in cold games. So just answering the question, are cold teams better in cold games? So here's a table for the comparison of cold teams versus warm teams in cold games. As you can see, there's a pretty big difference between EPA per play, and the test results in a Z statistic of 3.685, which is significant at a 5% significance level. So you can conclude that EPA per play for cold teams is in fact different than the EPA per play for warm teams in cold games. So in conclusion, all else equal, game temperature does not have an effect on EPA per play. However, cold teams do seem to be better in cold games in terms of EPA per play. And then just some limitations of the analysis. So I only controlled for wind. I didn't control for other weather conditions such as snow, sleet, rain. These are things that often can affect gameplay. Also, the R-squared value for the regression was very low, so it didn't explain much of the variation in EPA per play. Also, some teams, such as those that play in domes, played in very few cold games. Minnesota, Detroit, and Indianapolis all play in domes, but were included as cold weather teams. And then some of the more dominant offenses over the last decade were cold teams. So New England, Green Bay, Denver, back with Peyton Manning, Pittsburgh. This might contribute to the overall higher EPA per play for cold teams over the last decade. And then lastly, there's a different number of plays run in each subset of games. So the majority of teams ran more plays in warm weather games just because they played in more warm weather games. So that's all I have. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, thank you to Patrick on his analysis. Does anyone have any questions, comments? I wish I could add a little bit more, but for some reason, when I'm sharing my screen with the sound, I don't get to hear it. So does anyone have any insight or any questions for Patrick for him to modify? Jacob?
Yeah, I would just like to see going forward if he's planning on it, controlling for other weather elements, especially snow. Like I think that anybody who's ever watched a snow game, would tell you that it's just everything just looks so different. So I'd be really curious to see how the data plays out with that. Thank you.
Thanks, Jacob. Josh, did you have something to add?
Yes, I did. I'm up here in Canada working with the CFL, and all our games after the month of September are cold weather games, seeing as 8 of the 9 teams play in outdoor stadiums here. One thing I'd like to see looked at as well is the effect of humidity, because it's cold everywhere here, but humidity varies widely across the country. So that, I think, would have some impact as well.
Very cool. Thank you, Josh. Yeah, my question from the slides, it's very awkward with sitting in dead silence watching the slides go by, is deciding on cold weather teams, if we want to, it was mentioned in the limitations, is Indianapolis a cold weather team, or Minnesota? Obviously they're in cold weather cities, but they don't play their home games in cold weather due to the domes. I wonder if I would assume that would make some difference to the way that they play. They probably don't practice as much like the Bears would outside to prepare for the weather. All righty. Well, thank you to Patrick. Our next presentation is, again, I've heard that we got the video room, and just to let you guys know, the reason for some of these video presentations is due to this being on a Friday. So our student presentations, we have students that are in school right now, so they were unable to attend, but they wanted to submit their research. So our next presentation is Finding the Next Defensive Player by Becca Skolnick, Tamara Zolik, and Rediat Habtegabriel. Please pardon my pronunciations there. From Denison University. So I am going to go ahead and pull up their presentation here, and we will do the same. I'm assuming that I will once again be silent. My side will be silent, but as long as you guys can see and hear, we will be good to go. So I'm going to share my screen. Someone give me a yes, no if you can see. Oh, actually, I need to share with the video. Okay, good. Give me like a signal in the chat if we can see that. Anybody here? Can you guys see the? All right, I'm gonna hit play. If we can't hear, please send me a message.
Yeah, I can see it.
All right, thank you.
Hello, everyone. So we're a group from Denison University,
hear,
and our
please send me
project
a
is on
message in the
finding the
chat.
next defensive player in the NFL. My name is Becca Skolnick, and I'm a math and biology double major.
Hi, my name is Rediat Gabriel. I'm a junior at Denison University, and I'm majoring in psychology and data analytics.
Hi, my name is Tamara Jolich. I'm a sophomore majoring in data analytics, minoring in computer science. So I'll start us off today, and our project is basically we're predicting the quality of a defensive player in the NFL from their combine performances. It's something that the NFL franchises and invests millions of dollars in yearly. The combine is one of the most important events for new athletes coming into the professional sport, and the aim of the study is to take that and examine it further. After discovering a relationship between draft trade value and round pick, we are using linear regression models in an attempt to find a relationship that links the combine stats, the 40-yard dash, 20-meter shuttle, the bench press, broad and vertical jumps, to the quality of the defensive player and their draft trade value. We hope to have the ability to show a relationship between specific combine results and the quality of a defensive player related to their position. So our research question, as mentioned earlier, the combine tests players' ability to perform these 5 drills in an attempt to expose strengths in their upcoming years of professional football. The combine drills consist of the 40-yard dash, the vertical jump, the 20-yard shuttle, the bench press, which is 225 pounds, and they do that for repetition, and the broad jump. Each drill translates on the field as a source of explosive power and endurance strength, which is very important for defensive players and for what they are planning to expose in the combine. We want to expose which events from the combine correlate to strong performances, as certain events within the combine correlate slightly a little bit more to certain positions, and thereby we will be able to enable a greater accuracy in the performance of a defensive player.
So our data set is based on the fact of this graph. So essentially what we did is we took the idea of quality and we made it into an observable, recordable, quantitative value. So in this case, our data was representative of the variable of quality as draft trade value. And what we did to kind of make sure our data was sound was first observe to see if the higher quality players had a direct or indirect relationship with the draft trade value. And as you can see, they do. The lower the round, the higher the quality. And as you can see by representative of this graph, you also have the higher the draft trade value. So kind of moving on, what we did is we extended our search and conducted several linear regression models to kind of see which defensive positions did have significant draft trade values. And what we found was that, so the defensive end, the inside linebacker, the defensive tackle, cornerback, and the free safety all were found to have a significant relationship with draft trade values. And what we found were these were the p-values and the r-squared values, respectively, for each of these positions. And what we also found were correlated combined statistics. So how it works is that each of these statistics we show here with their designated relationship. So as you can see, negative relationship with the 40-yard dash and the draft trade value for the defensive end. And as you kind of work your way through, you can essentially map out which ideal combine statistics and trends you will see, which with players and the positions they'd be best suited for. And in doing so, as you can tell, like through the draft, you will be able to ideally predict the best players and how they're going to end up respectively.
Methodology. We use linear regression to examine the relationship between draft, trade, and combine performance in defensive players. Linear regression is used to predict the value of independent variable based on one or more independent variable. And to start with, we first filtered the data based on combine position and partitioned the data into training and test data set, which we later used to perform linear regression using draft trade value as a response variable. And we examined the underlying assumption to check for normalcy as seen on the right.
So in conclusion, our study exposed the statistically significant relationship linking draft trade value of specific defensive positions, namely, as we talked about, defensive ends, inside linebackers, free safeties, defensive tackles, and cornerbacks, with position-specific combine statistics. So essentially what this does is it gives potential scouts the ability to look at combine statistics and predict the quality of the players that they will be drafting into their teams. So as we talked about earlier, our statistics were represented on our earlier slides. And while our models did show statistical significance for specific defensive positions, it is clear that other variables may also have an impact. As you saw earlier, our R-squared values maxed out at about 16%, meaning that our models are only representative about 16% of the variation within the data set. So there's definitely a lot more statistical analysis to still take place in order for the NFL scouts to actually use this methodology. But we're looking into that and we'll progress as there comes. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so we have our presentation. Do we have any comments for the group on, if I can get out of this, impact or the defensive player presentation? And again, I can say I apologize if this is mentioned in the video, but as I said, I can't hear them on my side, but I did want to add something I saw in the slides and in general. Draft data is hard. Draft predicting things from strict draft numbers, very temperamental, and we do see kind of some random stuff it seems like popping out. One thing that I've noticed has been an issue is that a lot of players don't participate in all the drills, and because of that, certain players don't feel the need to show their skill set in certain areas, which leads to some odd results because the best players at specific tasks don't always do the drill. So that kind of skews the results a little bit. Jacob, I see you have a question or a comment.
Yeah, sorry, I actually need to be having questions all the time.
No, this is great. Glad.
Going forward, what I'd like to see is, as you mentioned, which was a great point, a lot of players don't participate in all the drills because either they're hurt or they don't want to lower their draft stock because they know they're not going to perform well, that sort of thing. So I'd like to see a separation of those that fully participate, those that don't, and then and those that don't, but also from there see if there would be a way to include taking their combine performance and then also rolling that into their college, the performance as a player over their college career and projecting that to future performance, which I know what a lot of this is where a lot of this wants to go, and that's a tall task. But I would really love to see that, because that's what I know a lot of people are trying to get at. Is as we've seen, like just a physical. What's the saying? Most great football players are great athletes, but great athletes don't make great football players. So just because you blow up the combine doesn't mean you're going to be a great football player.
Absolutely. That's a great point, trying to link it to other things outside, because there are just so many externalities that occur with the combine. But I think it was very nicely done. Really appreciate the work. Let's move on to our final football presentation. I'm watching our time here. Looks like we're right on schedule, so we're going to just keep plugging away. So we're going to go to the fantasy football consistency analysis by Aidan Corey of the Ohio State University, and we have him in the building here. So Aidan, you are free to share.
Awesome, thank you, and I'll share that. Can you see it right now?
It's loading.
Oh, okay.
All right, we got it.
Good.
You're good to go.
Okay, let me put this.
Again, I'll give you a 2 minute and 1 minute in the chat privately.
Awesome, thank you. All right, so good morning, everybody. My name is Aidan Corey, and I'm a freshman finance student here at Ohio State. And today we'll be presenting this project I've been working on over the past few weeks that I call King Consistency. And it just takes an empirical look into the effects of player consistency on the win percentage in fantasy football. Now, I assume a lot of you here have played fantasy football, or at least understand how it works, but just a little background for those of you who are unfamiliar with it. Shown here is a box score of a regular fantasy football matchup, and you can see that it's based on the weekly real-time NFL matchups in which each player's passing, rushing, and receiving stats earn them points for their respective team. And each team usually consists of about 8 to 12 players. I think this league has 9, but yeah. And then as you can assume or already know, wins are determined based on the total points within the matchup. Also, I'm not going to lie, I did choose this particular box score for my own league a few weeks back just to try to somewhat validate my experience with fantasy, because I did win by over 100. So just wanted to throw that out there. So one trend that's pretty easy to identify and understand is that the higher your average per game of one of your players is, the higher your win percentage is to be. However, the stat that I've become particularly invested in is a player's consistency. Consistency can be measured by their standard deviation of their games played in, where the most consistent players have the lowest standard deviation. So it's kind of like an inverse, but you can't necessarily just do like an inverse function of it, because the most consistent players have a standard deviation of 0. So 1 over 0 wouldn't particularly work. But one phenomenon that has developed over the years, and that I've heard the famous ESPN fantasy football expert Matthew Berry say time and time again, and which I've read time and time again when looking at its like weekly forecast, is that consistency is king. And I'm using this entire project as a platform to test this efficacy of this statement and look at how the most consistent players affect win percentages compared to the least consistent players. So before diving into the methods and results of this project, I'd like to explain this situation right here. In a situation in which all variables were the same except the two players' weekly average and their weekly standard deviation, you have to make a choice on who to start. Mike Evans, as you can see, averages just below 18 points a game, and DJ Moore averages just above 15 points a game, and they're both wide receivers. However, DJ Moore's standard deviation is actually more than half of, or less than half of Mike Evans, because he has 6.7 and Evans is 13.87. What I found intriguing is that after I ran 1,000 randomized simulations in Excel, Moore actually won 54% of these games. And this observation inspired the setup of my project, in which I set up 6 made-up players who all averaged the same amount, but increased in standard deviation from player to player. So each player from chart 1 would compete against each other in these simulations, and each player from chart 2 would compete against each other from these simulations. Chart 1 and chart 2 don't differ from each other at all in average and deviation, but they differ in that the sign of the variance from the average differs for each result. So for example, if you look at Jet's like first column right here, he has 18 points, which is 3 above the average 15. Giant, his counterpart in chart 2, has 12, which is 3 below 15. And then this trend continues for each counterpart. So Colt with Panther in the top to bottom, Jet with Giant, Ram with Bengal, and so on. I then ran 120 simulations for each possible matchup using this function at the top, in which Excel randomly chose one of the games that the corresponding player had. And in this example, I just used Bronco from this previous chart right here. You can see is 25, 18, 16. So I did this random between where it'll choose one of those numbers randomly each time. I then set up functions to run these simulations, list the winner of each simulation, and count the total wins, losses, and ties from each matchup. 120 simulations was ideal because it minimized the effect of chance taking over. And since 120, one of the multiples is 10, you can just divide it to get an average win-loss within a season, because games usually consist of 12 to 13 games. So the results of this project did not go completely as I expected, but led me to an eye-opening observation that wasn't initially perceivable. If you look at the graphs on the right, you can see that they oscillate as a player becomes less and less consistent, or as the standard deviation rises. For the blue graph, which uses the data from chart 1, the worst player, Jet, was actually the second most consistent player. So this does not live up to this consistency is king standard. However, if you recall his stat line, we can see that of his 12 total games, 9 of them fell below the average. Jet's counterpart in chart 2, Giant, had the same deviation, but 9 of these games were above the average. And you can see that Giant's win percentage was actually the best of any player in the entire project, with 57%. Meanwhile, the extremely inconsistent players such as Packer and Seahawk both fell within only 0.25% of this 50-50 win rate. And all of this led me to the conclusion that consistency is an oscillating determinant of win percentage. If the majority of the population of games rests above the average 15 points per game, then consistency can be considered ideal. In fact, a low standard deviation with the majority of the games above the average and minimal games slightly below the average is, I think, the best fantasy football player prototype in maximizing win percentage. As the deviation increases, the effects seen at lower deviation levels dwindle. And the inconsistent player's win percentage closes in on 50% because the win percentage versus standard deviation of weekly average is ultimately a convergent series. So this analysis project's conclusions can be used strategically going forward in fantasy leagues when deciding among players with similar averages the year prior to the draft, or the year before the draft on draft day, or when choosing a starter between players with similar averages in prior games. One can measure consistency and identify the amount of games above the average to determine which player maximizes their chances of winning. So yeah, that basically concludes my presentation on king consistency. I thoroughly enjoyed this process of working on this and wanted to thank you all for being here today, and give a special shout out to SIA just because, like I said, I am a freshman. I have no prior experience with data analysis or sports business, but it's one of my aspirations to work in these fields one day. So I just appreciate this conference providing me a platform to at least start somewhere. So thank you.
Thank you, Aiden. I think you're taking personal shots at me by showing DJ Moore, who's been killing me this year.
Yeah.
What kind of questions do we have for Aiden? We are going to keep the questions short to make sure that we are moving along here.
I got one if
Go for it.
Okay. Hey, Aiden, I really like the presentation. In my league, we have no head-to-head, and we cut the lowest scoring team each week. So we start with 17 teams, and then you can bid on those players after the team's cut, and you're left with one winner. So having a high floor for players is pretty good. Two of my receivers are Lockett and Woods. Woods is very consistent, and Lockett's great on an average play basis this year. But you see that boom bust a lot. So I don't know if you looked into like what players have like a decent floor, but also have like the high upside ability rather than just kind of like staying consistent, or like how those player scoring distributions kind of panned out for different players and which were more valuable.
Yeah, and for sure. And if you look at the chart back here, like it was kind of just random intervals. I kind of just tried to mix it around a bit because like I said, I don't have like any prior experience with the data analysis, but I did find, because you said it wasn't a head-to-head league that you're in, you said?
Yeah, right. That's correct. You just have to be not the worst team 16 weeks in a row to win.
Right. And this comparison is especially useful for head-to-head leagues because it like takes a look at, like, you could just say, all right, your team has 120 points, the other team has 120, and it's coming down to Monday Night Football, and you need to like, what is your win percentage of win, or what's your chances of winning, or what players should you start based on like how you can maximize win percentage. And that's kind of what this project helps me to learn. So I think that would be good going forward though, just to kind of analyze not just the consistency and the intervals of which they score, but rather their floor and their ceiling as well.
Yeah, cool. I really liked it. So again, good job.
Yeah, thank you.